Welcome to This Jungian Life. Three good friends and Jungian analysts, Lisa Marciano, Deborah Stewart, and Joseph Lee, invite you to join them for an intimate and honest conversation that brings a psychological perspective to important issues of the day.
I'm Lisa Marciano, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Philadelphia.
I'm Joseph Lee, and I'm a Jungian analyst in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
I'm Deborah Stewart, a Jungian analyst on Cape Cod.
So today we're going to be talking about shopping, which is something that many of us have a lot of energy for and can take on significant meaning. This topic was actually suggested to us by my sister. So we just want to sort of dedicate today's episode to my sister.
I don't know where the two of you are exactly with this, but I am very enthusiastic about it. There is something of the call to adventure for me in shopping. The treasure is out there, and I am on the hero's journey, the quest. I am questing after the gold. And I can also volunteer that this is a week that I am back in Brooklyn. And so there are many opportunities that I'm delighted to avail myself of for poking my nose into a shop here and there and seeing what new treasure might await me.
So it evokes this image of the cornucopia, that, these boutiques are just endless cornucopias with goods and wonderful things just flowing out of them. I also think shopping is so informed by family dynamics. Like in my family, we came out of a real working class family. So shopping was deeply integrated with the bargain, finding the bargain. So it was a huge event. Like anytime you shopped, you had to bring it home, and then you had to show it off, and then you had to talk about the great bargain that you got and how much it cost.
I'm remembering us being in training, and I came in with a new pair of shoes, and you said, "I like your shoes," and I said, "Thanks, I got them for $30 or something." And you were reveling with me.
I totally understand that. And I have a great story about my grandmother, who was this incredible. She was like a nefarious shopper. Every day she'd come home. She was a telephone operator at the Roosevelt Hotel when they used to have, kind of manual operators and wires moving around. And her ritual was that every single day she would come home, she would go to a local department store, and then she would shop. And she would particularly shop for us because we were little. So she would find a piece of clothing, and she would walk around the store, and then she'd put it in a different department on a different floor. And then she'd come back and find it again. And every time she'd find the same piece of clothing. And by moving it around the department store, it would linger in the store for weeks or months until it was marked down so low.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Isn't that brilliant? I mean, that's incredible. And then she would buy us this very gorgeous kind of clothing that she could then, of course, afford, because it had been marked down so powerfully.
Wow. Yeah, talk about a quest.
Yes.
And there was great joy in being able to work the system like that.
Well, I'm thinking about my family tradition. There wasn't very much at all in the way of shopping. It just somehow wasn't much on the table as any kind of locus of real attention. And of course, there was shopping, but I think it was all sort of matter of fact and getting you what you needed rather than shopping expeditions. Today, for me, it's about seeing creative ideas as they are represented in household items or clothing or anything. There is the endless creativity of the human spirit in new colors or an interesting take on a scarf or a bowl or anything at all. So I enjoy the touching and the feeling and the seeing, almost as if somehow it's folk art. And if I want something or I'm interested in something, I very much enjoy the back and forth exchange with somebody in the shop. And I vastly prefer small shops to big department stores.
Hmm.
Yeah, it seems to me you're talking about the sort of the pleasure of the
Hmm.
beauty and how it feels and how it looks and the color. And it seems like something about shopping picks up this place of our relationship with materiality. How we feel about the material world. And of course, the root word comes from mater or mother. So this kind of touches into how we relate in this real kind of grounded way with the mother that is the substrate of all of our physical experiences in the material world.
Well, I'm thinking about some of the mystical ideas. Like in Hinduism, there's this relationship between Shiva and Shakti, and Shiva is the undifferentiated light, and Shakti is the mother of all forms. So
Exactly.
the archetypal mother gives birth to all of the differentiated beauties of the world, and the fact that human beings can still make new things that have perhaps never been seen before in new colors and new substances still participates in that multiplication of possibilities that we associate with the archetypal mother.
Oh, that's it. It's the multiplicatio,
Hmm.
the abundance cornucopia. That's right. That really resonates for me.
And when I think about your shopping style, Deb, I think it's also very much a function of extroverted feeling. That for extroverted feeling types, as we're moving through the world, our souls are naturally curious about what our feeling nature will invest in, which then makes the object kind of glow a bit.
That's exactly it. And the interaction with the person in the store. I like the small shops because it has been personally selected. Someone has invested their own libido and creative spirit in buying these particular things rather than just, a boatload of dishes or towels or sweaters. That I see the creative spirit in the inventory itself and in the personal exchange.
Mhm. And the experience that you have around purchasing the object, which includes the interactions with the individuals, enhances the level of investment in the object.
Yes.
Then, in a sense, the object is now impregnated with the memories of that lovely conversation you had with the shopkeeper.
And knowing it's the object's ancestry,
Mhm.
that this is a bowl that comes from, let's say, a pottery or something, either in another country or some small shop up in Vermont or something like that. That there's that grounding in a specific place and people who made this thing.
Mhm. And I think that I've heard this said before that extroverted feeling types actually fuel the entire shopping community.
Well,
That
I'm just doing my part to help the economy stay healthy.
That's right. You're helping the world just keep moving along because not only is it a style of shopping, but it's so gratifying
It
that
is.
there's something that you really love about that adventure.
It is. It is a joyful experience for me.
Another way that I find myself shopping is that sometimes, of course, I'm just scanning to notice what might be beautiful or interesting to me. But sometimes I'll engage shopping because I've already identified what it is that I need, that I've already introspected and said, I need this kind of an object. And then shopping becomes more of a search, more of a kind of hunt to find and match up the outer treasure that I'm specifically looking for. And I can mobilize tremendous amounts of energy to kind of resource all of that. And some of this can be extremely lowly, like the refrigerator broke down, and I needed to find this exact part in order to have the refrigerator repaired. And it was an older refrigerator. So kind of penetrating the web to find, honestly, to find the exact manual for that model of refrigerator, and then finding the exact part number, and then searching through the web to find who still manufactures this exact thing. And it has this very specific kind of quest. And then the purchase may have, I don't remember, maybe it was $8 or something, but it was so incredibly satisfying to hunt for that needle in the haystack. So it's a different kind of very targeted shopping experience.
Yeah, and I mean, the web really makes that possible, which, it can become almost a little obsessive at times. Like, I want to find this exact item in this precise color and that kind of thing.
But I'm appreciating the detective or sleuth archetype here, that you're going to find it.
I was thinking, Joseph used the word hunt, and Deb, to, pick up on your sleuth archetype. I do think that because I have thought about, for a long time, why shopping feels so, why we often feel compelled to do it and why it feels so satisfying. And I think it probably does have a sort of rough parallel to the experience of the hunt. We have an impulse to go out and capture the thing that we want or need. And it can take up an enormous amount of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Although I will say I'm appreciating a difference between Joseph and me, and I'm sure we're resonating with listeners, that Joseph is the hunter and the sleuth, whereas I sort of go out there into the forest, not knowing exactly what I will encounter. It's a more broad brush or broadly focused kind of quest for me. I mean, there are some times when I have an object in mind, but sometimes it's just, I don't know what I'll come across.
Yes, and I think that's that difference between seeking and scanning. The seeking is, to me, has a very targeted kind of hunting process. The scanning is kind of just casting my awareness out and hoping that my libido will land on an object, and that it's the landing of the libido that produces delight.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly as an extrovert, when we don't have an outer object to trigger that enlivenment, we actually can feel a little bit deadened. That extroverts require outer objects in order to feel enlivened, which is very much the difference between introverts and extroverts. So extroverts really, really love and need outer people, outer beautiful things, outer adventures, in order to keep libido flowing.
I'm also thinking in the context of scanning. I like that a lot, the difference between those two orientations. There's an aspirational quality to the scanning process of it's kind of like I don't know what will be out there. It's having a dream that is sort of broad brushed, and then it can get focused and concretized in a particular bowl or any other kind of an object or a magical scarf or something like that.
That's interesting. So it's like something mysterious then kind of constellates or is like manifested suddenly and then discovered.
Exactly.
Well, I'm aware that I'm feeling a little Saturnian in this conversation because there is a way that I can really appreciate, kind of reveling in beauty and just being so in touch with materiality and enjoyment and pleasure of things. But, let's face it, the planet is in not such great shape. And that's partly because we all consume too much.
You are being Saturnian.
I know. But there is a way that sometimes I think, I mean, the term retail therapy, we can all really relate to. The way that sometimes we shop in order to kind of meet an emotional need, or that it can be, desiring an object can be a concretization of a soul desire or a soul need. For example, if we need to grow in some way, there's always this possibility that we will try to kind of buy the thing as a shortcut for authentic growth.
Yeah, let's really unpack that. I think you're onto something, that there's a certain temporary experience that we can sometimes have in the purchase of an outer object, which is really almost like a symbolic or ritualized gesture, which may or may not actually shift us at the level of soul, which we were hoping for.
Right. I mean, I would say most of the time, outer objects and, concrete manifestations are, at best sort of an image that can be almost like a token or talisman, that sort of holds a place for some inner work. But, I mean, who knows better about the symbolic substitute for an inner need than the advertising industry? I mean, this is how it works, right? They hold up a car or an outfit or an object or a particular brand of liquor as the thing that will help us realize some aspect of ourselves. And we're often very ready to concretize a psychological experience into acquisitory, well, let me just buy this thing and that will give me some facsimile of that inner growth.
Sure. And there's even the kind of ubiquitous example of, I'm a middle-aged guy, which by the way I am. And, this jalopy of a body begins to kind of break down and the clear coat is gone. And, I got scratches and dents all over it. And then, boy, I got to tell you, really powerful, fast, sexy cars can really capture my imagination. And this feeling that owning a car or driving a car like that the shine of a big, gorgeous, beautiful car will somehow upgrade me in some fashion. And I think the industry
Yes.
definitely benefits from that fantasy, and then after about a year or two, as the car loses its luster, which by the way is very similar to a new relationship, your fantasies begin to drift away after about 6 to 24 months, then it's just an expensive new car. And it really doesn't, make me feel physically vigorous anymore. What the kind of fantasy material that can be drawn around the object.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And of course, the fantasies are powerful. Like one of the fantasy-driven shopping things that I will do is, it's kind of the end of the night. I'm tired, but I'm not ready to go to bed. And I will just open up one of the real estate apps on the phone and I will just look at houses. And I'll look at houses all over the world sometimes to just imagine what it would be like to own that house, what it would be like to live in it or to live in that area or that country. And I have an enormous appetite for shopping for houses. It totally captured my fantasy.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
But when we're looking at objects particularly that we gravitate towards, like I would say that shopping for a house or another house is something that my psyche frequently enjoys doing in this kind of fantasy imaginal level. And it does give me pause to ask, what are the values that I'm hoping to connect to and what does it symbolize for me to imagine being in these different environments that I am on a soulful level reaching for?
Right. I mean, whenever I get caught by a fantasy around acquiring something, I do try to ask myself, well, what is my soul reaching for? What is my psyche yearning for? And it's not always wrong to manifest that in a concrete way. I mean, sometimes I think that that's what needs to happen, but we probably as a culture tend to focus too much on the concrete.
Yes, that searching for real estate is an interesting little ritual. And like one of the things I find myself gravitating towards is that I want more space. I want there to be less walls. I want the ceilings to be higher, to have more square footage. And that really captures a kind of yearning for expansiveness that my soul is tracking and fantasizing about.
That's a very interesting exercise, isn't it? Is for each of us to think about what is being outpictured in the objects that we yearn for or shop for. And I'm thinking, I particularly resonate to beautiful household goods. I just love housewares. I cannot imagine, not that I've bought any recently, but I cannot imagine shopping for towels without touching them, or shopping for for dishes or kitchenware. Even I have some beautiful wooden spoons that I've found here, there, and everywhere. So there's something about touch, creativity, and connection. It's a good question. What is housewares to me? What does it represent?
There's a lot of Hestia energy there, isn't there? Sort of
Mhm.
Mhm.
goddess of the hearth.
And I have, rather than going on to buy more things, the things I buy that I love deeply are satisfying to me for years.
I think that's so important that you're spending enough time to find something that your libido is really invested in so that each time you revisit the object, it still has an enhancing vitality for you. I think that's very important.
Yeah, and it's very different, I think, than what a lot of us do, which is kind of buy things a little bit more compulsively. There are people who shop all the time. I certainly have stories coming into my practice of, clothes with the tags still on them, still in the bags. So that's a very different sensibility to kind of deeply feel pleasure in an object and have a conscious awareness of it being meaningful rather than just sort of buying stuff to kind of fill an empty hole almost.
The more I think about myself, and this is, I resonate to objects that are related to touch. And I think that sensate touching, even my handheld, wooden spoons and other things that are literally that I touch my heart as well. The connection between sensation and emotion.
So we're really making, I think, a very important distinction between whether the shopping is ultimately focused on developing a relationship with the object that's going to be purchased. But also, shopping has other stages to it. For instance, the approach to the shopping environment, the excitement of searching, and then actually just the purchasing of it. And for some people, that's where the libido ends, and that the actual object itself that has been acquired holds very little of the libido. And so, therefore, the bag of new clothing could be tossed into a back room and forgotten very, very easily, only to be discovered weeks or months later as a whole bag of clothes that the person, it actually fell out of their memory that the clothing was back there, because actually interacting with the object, that's not where the libido landed. That's not where the life force is.
Well, I mean, I think obviously shopping in that particular manifestation can be a way of avoiding ourselves, avoiding feelings, avoiding discomfort. That's really a way of managing feelings. Really, is just to go off and shop to just kind of get things out of your mind. And because it feels sort of satisfying to buy something.
Just the excitement of being able to purchase does something, I think, for the ego state, that people can feel enhanced and powerful when they actually kind of pull the trigger or click the final purchase moment. It reaffirms their sense that they're bountiful. It reaffirms the sense that they have resources. And nowadays, with the endless amount of credit we can have, it gives people the sense of endless capacity to acquire, which feeds something in the psychic life.
Well, it's a wonderful distraction.
Can be a distraction, absolutely.
I really agree with all of that, that it gives us a distraction and a sense of abundance and status of when we are purchasing something, we have the money, we have the inner libido, we have the wherewithal of I can have that, whether it's something as big as a car or a truck or something smaller. But it's empowering and it is ego oriented.
It is. It's ego syntonic in a way. Something that I find in people who are going through a spate of lots of purchases. Sometimes we'll explore it, and it is something to do with reaffirming that they are entitled to something. And that's sometimes compensating for a younger part of them that doesn't feel entitled to live or entitled to have good things or a good life. And underneath that sometimes, if I think about it psychoanalytically, entitled to be loved, entitled to the mother, entitled to be parented fully. So it can trickle up from those really deep primal levels all the way up to this adult sophisticated personality, just through the multiple clicking on the, finish to the transaction and pay now. But there's a deep drum beat that's sounding in the bottom of the psyche that's wanting to be cared for.
It's meeting an unmet need.
Or as we've said in other podcasts, that it's a form of neurotic suffering, that you can never get too much of what you don't need. So if, for instance, if somebody feels or felt profoundly unmothered, and through this very circuitous route, that energy comes up through the various aquifers and it shows up as, constantly shopping for certain items, boy, you just can't buy enough mother-related stuff to itch that need. But we do it over and over again sometimes.
I think we've all learned to kind of outsource our emotional needs to physical objects or to food. That have a cookie, have a reward as a substitute for the real inner emotional feelings and needs and pain.
And I want to take it in a slightly different direction. Talk about how shopping can be a way that we cathect or try to cathect with something of transcendent value. So Jung talked about the religious function of the psyche, that we have an inborn need to relate to something of transcendent value, and that this is a natural part of being human. And this, in my way of thinking, can get concretized and kind of projected onto objects. So we think, for example, that, gold is an interesting item, right? Because gold has a tremendous symbolic value for that which is of the highest value. It's solar, it's, of the sun. And a lot of people love to shop for jewelry, for gold jewelry in particular. And it can feel like perhaps that we've projected our need for a kind of spiritual contact onto this object. And there's a fairy tale that comes to mind in this regard, which I believe we've talked about on a previous podcast, if I'm not mistaken, but it's the story of the fisherman and his wife. And the fisherman is out fishing and he pulls up this flounder, which I think in some versions of the story is actually golden. And the flounder says, "Don't kill me. I'm a prince under a spell," or something. I forget exactly what he says. But basically, the bottom line is the fisherman's like, "Yeah, the fish talked. So I'm just going to throw him back." And in general, like when you're out fishing and you pull up a fish and it speaks to you, it's a good idea to throw it back.
Okay.
So if that ever happens, just,
follow that advice.
So the fisherman goes home and explains what happened. And he lives in a hovel with his wife. And she says, "Well, what were you thinking? Go back and ask that fish to grant you a wish and tell him that we want to live in a nice cottage." So he does that, and he goes back to the sea and he calls the fish and he says, "I want to live in a cottage." And the fish says, "Well, it's done." So he goes home and he's got this lovely cottage. So the fairy tale kind of continues from there, where the wife is happy with her new acquisition for a brief time. And then she says to the husband, "No, go back. I want to live in a house. And then I want to live in a mansion. And then I want to live in a palace. And then I want to be king." And then I think the final thing she wants to be is either Pope or God or something
God.
like. Yeah, I think she wants to be God. And then he goes back and asks the fish, and the fish says, "Yeah, go home." And he goes home, and they're back in the hovel. The thing in the fairy tale that really is truly magical and transcendent is the fish. The fish, we might consider it to be, for example, of a symbol of the self with a capital S, that kind of ever renewing font of kind of spiritual sustenance. And when we relate to that in a kind of acquisitional, extractive way, where we just want to kind of use it to self-aggrandize according to our ego desires, that is a real violation of our relationship with that energy.
Yeah, that's what I think you're talking about here too, Lisa, is greed. And I agree with everything you've said. It's really right on in a very deep way. But it takes me to, what is greed? What happens when we can't get enough of what clearly we really don't need? If I think of your example, Joseph, of a bag of new clothes that gets thrown in the back of the house or something, of what's behind our insatiable greed for certain objects or anything that we shop for when it doesn't satisfy.
Yeah, well, I think it goes to Joseph's point about neurotic suffering. I mean, there's this expression that we don't, and I don't remember who said this. I apologize, but it's something like, we don't buy things with money. We buy things with hours of our life. So there's a way that, if we're not, it's like we're investing our life energy in the wrong thing, maybe. So it becomes a substitute for what we really do need.
Well, I'm just thinking about the whole magnetic attraction that each one of us has towards any number of experiences or objects. And what is it that draws us to an object? So whether it's, accumulating millions and millions of dollars so that we can look at the bank statement and we have some relationship to that, and that whatever is happening, the psyche can generate enough life force to make people work, sometimes slavishly, to accumulate wealth or to accumulate multiple cars that they own or bags of clothes that they'll never wear. But there is this magnetism that kind of captures the ego and binds it to this acquisition. And in its worst case, it's a kind of irresponsible covetousness. But there is an experience that's being reached for, right? People are trying to feel something, which you said might be the numinous. Is it actually a projection of the God image into any of these acquisitions?
I mean, I think it can be. I'm not saying it necessarily always is, but it possibly can be sometimes.
What comes up for me in this context is our, I think, inherent existential angst of, are we really secure? Are we really okay? Do we really have enough? Maybe more of this or a better that or whatever else will make us feel secure, stable, safe, and well cared for. As I think about where I went in my own fantasy was to hunter-gatherers who have very, very few possessions and yet live as well, I think, from their point of view and their context as we do. Have all of our appliances and technology and everything really made us more aware or happier or more satisfied. There's an existential dimension here.
Can you say more about that existential dimension, what you're thinking with that?
That we have an inborn awareness of our fleeting time on this planet. We have an inborn tendency toward anxiety. Am I really okay? Is my job going to last? Am I truly deeply secure in my body on this world? And we surround ourselves with objects and with supplies and all kinds of things to assuage some of that anxiety.
So it's a way of avoiding some of these excruciating existential questions which are constantly pressing against us, perhaps. And there is something to that. I think that, for instance, if somebody is profoundly wealthy for perhaps 60 or 70 years, they may be able to create a very beautiful buffer against a lot of the suffering in the world, until, of course, that final suffering of decrepitude and death cannot be purchased away. I think Steve Jobs started publishing a little bit towards the end of his life. about what it meant to him to not be able to escape death after all of these tremendous successes that he had.
And there are lots and lots of little deaths. We experience losses in life of people that we love, and ambition that can't be fulfilled, disappointments. In a way, they're related to little deaths of various kinds. And we want to reassure ourselves. So one solution is to, acquire something, or a really great outfit, or something in gold that says, you're fine, you're okay, you're safe. And people do body painting and all kinds of other things to infuse themselves with life and a feeling of safety, feeling of okayness.
Just picking up on this a little bit, I'm thinking about these kind of historical examples, like the first emperor of China who wanted to be immortal and who pursued that very seriously, including amassing this giant army of terracotta warriors to protect his tomb. And also, the pharaohs in ancient Egypt. Talk about stuff. Their tombs were elaborately filled with beautiful objects that they would need in the afterlife. And the pyramids themselves were, gigantic tombs. So this kind of project, Deb, of trying to use material things to ward off the certainty of our own eventual death.
And various diminishments. If the beautiful gold necklace or a piece of jewelry, of course it gives us a lift of, I'm okay, today's a great day. I've boosted my self-esteem, or my ego, or my confidence in how I look with my new sweater, or whatever it might be. It does assuage us. But if we're shopping for that reason, it's a palliative. It works for a day or a week or a month or whatever, but it's time limited. And then we got to go do it again.
Yeah. I think one of the possible problems with, say, compulsive shopping is not that we overvalue stuff. It's that we don't value it enough. It's like, because we've stripped matter of its grounding in mater, in the mother. And our planet Earth, of course, is the mother, or the matrix from which all of our material possessions come, but we've kind of lost contact with the sacred nature of that. We don't value matter. And then what we've done essentially is repudiated this kind of archetypal power. And when we do not consciously acknowledge a great unconscious power, we have, willfully denied sort of like the sacred origin of material things. And that makes us need to kind of just compulsively consume more and more, because we're not in touch with the sacred nature of the stuff that we're shopping for, so it doesn't nourish us. And Deb, that's what I like about your image of going in and out of little boutiques and finding beautiful little things that feel, wonderful to you. It's like, somehow, to me, when I picture you doing that, I think you're sort of in touch with the sacred nature of that beautiful wooden spoon or something. And so it's more deeply nourishing.
And so that's a very feeling toned way of relating to the object. I also want to say that for thinking types, that the utility of an object can be just as mysterious and godlike. The fact that something can do something amazing, and that they can rationally assess why this is incredibly important to them and meets their needs, also can make it seem very, very magical. But I think we're both on the same page that whether we approach it through a rational evaluation, kind of, you go through Consumer Reports and you have all 27 excellent reasons why you buy the car, or whether you buy the car because it's beautiful and it makes you feel amazing to drive it, that both of those evaluating parts of the personality can still be pointing towards something that's transcendent. And when the transcendent is linked to the outer object, we have a tendency to treasure it. And if we treasured the objects in our environment, maybe we would feel more sated. We would feel more sustained by them. And then the libido could be released to pursue other things instead of shopping. I'd also like to bringing it back to just ego psychology a little bit, that there is a real distinction between spending and acquiring. Spending has to do with the feeling of release, and acquiring has to do with the feeling of holding. And I have absolutely have clients and friends who, as soon as they get a bonus, it's like their hands are burning until they spend it, that it has to be spent, that the release of the tension of having that extra cash is compelling to them. And then also I have both friends and clients who acquiring and holding onto wealth or holding onto the acquisitions is the primary joy. And Freud had a lot of interesting things to say about the release of tension and the holding of tension. He related this actually to the anal stage of psychosocial development and this idea of learning how to potty train even, and the pleasure of retaining control of the instincts and the pleasure of releasing those instincts. And from that really biological frame, that is also playing a role in terms of spending and acquiring. So it sounds funny to go from this religious, inspirational talk to toilet training, but somehow it feels compensatory, to bring in
two sides of a coin,
two sides of a coin, But it still points to this enormous issue that human beings really need to bring a lot of thought to, and eventually some decision making on a conscious level.
Well, I think we have circumambulated the process of shopping. I'm almost starting to feel like we're shopping while we do this topic. So perhaps it is time for us to say enough on that for now anyway, and look at a dream. Hi, this is Deb from This Jungian Life podcast. Joseph, Lisa, and I have been deeply moved by your response to our work. But producing, editing, and distributing it involves substantial expenses, and now we need your help. Please stop by our website, thisjungianlife.com, and click on the heading, Be Our Patron. You'll be redirected to our Patreon funding page. Patreon helps creators connect with people who believe in projects like ours. There, you can sign up with your credit card to support us for as little as $1 a month. And at higher levels of support, we'll provide special episodes, behind-the-scenes photos and stories, and a chance to join a select pool of listeners for dream interpretations. Once again, please go to thisjungianlife.com and click on Be Our Patron. Thank you. This is a dream from a woman who is in her mid-40s. She is a psychiatrist, and here's the dream. Winter. I'm in a remote cabin with a group of young people. Cabin is old and empty, with holes in the walls and freezing drafts going back and forth. I feel terribly out of place, unsure who are these young people and why I'm here with them in this godforsaken place. Under the floor, we find a frozen body of an old man, white beard, white hair, calm face as if in deep contemplation. We don't know who he is. Suddenly, a swarm of reptiles coming at us, strange, snake-like, chimeric creatures. Their attack is vicious. I have a clay tablet in my hands and I use it as a shield against them. Suddenly, the attack is over. I look at my clay tablet and I see that where the reptiles attacked, there is writing in the ancient language that I wish I'd understood, but I don't. I want to leave, but the young people are begging me to stay. I open the door and find myself face to face with an old and gorgeous winter forest. My heart aches with longing to walk into the forest, and I decide to stay. Now, this dreamer also has told us that this dream occurred several days after a significant betrayal by a partner who left. She says that she mainly felt in the dream out of place and a wanting to leave, and that she has a special connection with forests. The frozen old man's face had a striking resemblance with the forest I see at the end of the dream. Wow, this is quite a dream.
There's a strange beauty in the dream, although I know that it's desolate and somewhat distressing for her. But it's really, really quite a piece of theater. As that plays out in my imagination, it would be kind of stunning thing to witness.
I'm thinking, I agree. And I'm thinking too of what is winter? That's just one word with a period after it. And I think winter is frozen feeling. And she has just suffered a terrible loss and betrayal. And here she is. She repeats some of the coldness, the remote cabin. The cabin is old and empty with holes in the walls and freezing drafts. So that image of something remote and cold.
And sort of inadequately protective.
Yes. However, there are young people. She's with a group of young people. She's not sure who they are or why she's here with them. So I'm thinking that maybe there's some forward movement here, some potential, some telos, as we say, of something that could be growing.
Yeah, I think the young people are active and they're full of feeling.
Yes.
And really, at the end of the dream, her heart is aching with longing.
Mm-hmm.
So one telos of the dream, or trajectory of the dream, is moving from the word winter to the end of heart aching and longing. So I might imagine that one of the tasks of the dream, one of the medicines of the dream, is to put her back in touch with that, the power of her heart and that aching life force that's thrumming in the heart. Winter, I don't find winter to be a kind of nefarious symbol in any way. I think of winter as beautiful, and I think of the mystery of the forest drawing all of its life down into the roots. One of the things that I often imagine is that when I'm walking in a winter forest, that right underneath the soil, there are hundreds of thousands of creatures that are hibernating. And sometimes I like to imagine that I can hear this chorus of tiny little hearts thrumming underneath the soil as they're all slumbering.
Well, I think you make a good point, Joseph, that there is a sort of a positive and a darker, light and dark side to winter.
But it is an image of depression, I think, Joseph. I mean, that's a beautiful image that you've just conjured for us. But even this idea about the life kind of going in and down, the life energy sort of flowing inward. I mean, that's a necessary process. And it can, in some ways, be a deeply comforting and growth promoting process. But it is what we think of as depression.
Well, she says that in the first scenario, she's in the remote cabin. There's holes in the walls, freezing drafts, and this God-forsaken place.
Ah, yes.
And so to be forsaken by God.
Yeah, it's like your libido has left you.
Yes, to be cast out into desolation, although she cannot feel connected to the young people there, but she's not alone. I mean, much like the chorus of hearts underneath the forest, that even in this seemingly God-forsaken place, there is life. And even in the swarm of chimeric creatures coming forward, that is full of dynamism and life, which she's ambivalent about.
The thing that seems to bring about the swarm is the discovery of the frozen old man.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the discovery that unleashes the rest of this sort of, highly energetic movement in the dream that seems to point toward the unfreezing that you point out at the end, Joseph, where there's heartache and longing. And That is such an evocative image. Under the floor, there is this frozen body of an old man. So something has been there for a long time. Sort of someone buried under the floorboards. Sort of this has probably been there for a while. It's been frozen there. It's from a long time ago. And it's the image of an old man with a white beard. So, Jung talked about this inner figure of the senex, can be the wise old man, an archetypal image of a wise old man.
Well, I'd like to offer an association, which is to the Norse god Odin. In the mythology, there's this process between Odin in his active state, and which is very much like Zeus. He's a god of triumph, he's a god of life. He's an ambivalent figure, like a lot of king deities, that he can give and take life, but also the god of poetry and ecstasy, magic, god of the dead. And there are cycles where Odin is awake, and there are cycles when Odin is asleep, and how the entire world changes as to whether or not Odin is awake or asleep. So when I think about this Norse landscape, this winterscape, and the discovery of the sleeping god, you know,
Hmm.
Joseph, I hadn't thought of this until you brought up Odin, but the writing on the tablets is almost like Odin receiving the runes.
there you go.
Do you know that story well, or do you want me to try to fumble my way through that?
Please bring it forward.
As I recall, one of the myths around Odin is that he's looking for revelation, and he hangs for 3 days and 3 nights, I think, on the tree Yggdrasil, and has to make a significant sacrifice, I think, of one of his eyes, if I'm not mistaken. And as a result, receives the runes, which were the basis for writing and knowledge. Did I do okay? Did I?
Sounds good.
Yeah, it's funny because what I wrote down about this dream is it is a dream of revelation, right? Something really is being revealed, and there is this gift of these, we might imagine them, runes on these clay tablets that are gifted in this kind of very frightening onslaught of these monstrous creatures.
And there's a message there that she doesn't understand yet. But I want to go back to the strange snake-like chimeric creatures. Chimeras are combinations of animals, like centaurs are a combination of human and horse. So she doesn't say exactly what they look like, who are angry and vicious and attacking. So something primitive and reptiles are cold-blooded, are coming and really launching an aggressive attack.
So I could imagine a couple of different scenarios in that archetypal realm. Has the ego disturbed the sleep of the old man, of the Odin, and something in the psyche is driving her back, that she's not submitting to the winter of her life correctly? And, because winter is a season, and the season has to be tolerated. And in the best scenario, the season would be embraced and found to be beautiful. Now, at the end of the dream, she does seem to be open to that, where the forest is gorgeous in its winterscape, and she longs to walk into the forest and not defend against the winter of her soul, but to find a beauty in her God-forsakenness. So something about unearthing the god prematurely from underneath the cabin that could suggest that she needs to leave it alone. In the same way that in the winter, if you dig up all the gestating plant bulbs, all the tulip bulbs in your yard, that you'll kill them all. You have to leave them alone and allow a natural process to happen. So it's possible that the reptiles represent a certain kind of archetypal defense to push her back from a certain direction that she wants to go. And I would say, I'm going to speculate that the dreamer, because we know she's a psychiatrist, so as well as all of the wisdom that she's acquired in that role, psychiatrists rather, also are well versed in the use of psychopharmacology. So it's also very common for somebody to be in the winter of their soul and to decide that they're not going to accept that and to change their mood by taking medication. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, perhaps, but sometimes that's the wrong thing to do. And we have to submit to the winter of the soul. To be forsaken by God is also, in the Christian tradition, called the dark night of the soul. And John of the Cross wrote extensively in that same language. And in that thinking, the dark night of the soul is an essential purgation of the personality in preparation for a deeper union with the divine.
It seems to me that all of these things combine in really ways that are very mysterious. That the cabin leads with the young people leads to the frozen body of the old man, which leads to a swarm of reptiles attacking. And then she has this clay tablet in her hands with writing in an ancient language. But at the end, somehow all this leads to, I want to leave, but the young people are begging me to stay. And then she sees the old and gorgeous winter forest. My heart aches to long to walk into the forest, and I decide to stay. So somehow all these alchemical ingredients have combined to changing this into something that she can accept. The winter forest is old and gorgeous now. The young people want her to remain, and she does. It seems a very promising lysis or conclusion to the dream.
I agree. Joseph, I think I think we all sort of agree with that arc. And then it's sort of like, what sense do we make? And I think I'm seeing it just a little, well, here's another way of seeing it. I mean, the nature of dreams is they're so multi-layered, that there's not sort of one right way to walk around it. But I'm thinking about the frozen body as an image of her surprisingly making contact with deeper, older wisdom. I mean, it's interesting that his face is contemplative. So, in a surprising way, in this God-forsaken place, she has made contact with something that we might even imagine as kind of ancestral, something she didn't know was there. And that coming into contact with that immediately puts her in the middle of this swarm of instinctual energy. I mean, one of the things about snakes, and Jung wrote about this a lot, that they're really an image of kind of lower cortical function. I mean, the instinctual part of our bodies. And I think it's so interesting that she's using a clay tablet to defend. So you can see this maybe as the dream, ego consciousness, the dream ego, defending against this kind of overwhelming instinctual energy. And so, what an interesting thing to suddenly find that you're holding a clay tablet, which of course, immediately for me brings up the Old Testament.
I was thinking of the Rosetta Stone.
Right. So yeah, again, something ancient, although these are clay tablets and not stone tablets. But here's the thing about a clay tablet is that it is able to be impressed upon, as indeed happens in the dream. So even though the ego is taking a defensive stance to these instinctual energies, it's still doing so in a way where something can be metabolized from this onslaught of instinctual energies. What's left behind is something refined, right? It's writing that she doesn't know how to decode yet, but it certainly is decodable. And perhaps it's that which makes her open to being able to remain in this beautiful forest and experience it as beautiful.
For me, that really resonates and fits of the process of her psyche in all these incredibly vivid archetypal images.
Yeah, it's a very archetypal dream.
Indeed. And I think the translation of the scratching marks into a language has to do with that symbol-making function in the psyche, that raw archetypal affect that rises up after she encounters the frozen man is blessedly translated into symbols on the clay tablet, which then she can take with her and, in the luxury of a more peaceful moment, begin to decipher. I also imagine at the end that, she, in a sense, gets to have both the forest and the warmth of the young people who need her. That at that moment, she may not have walked out into the forest, but the forest is still penetrating the house. It's still out there waiting for her, and she can still be in relationship to these, to the needs of the young people, which are also her needs. The need for connection and community and to be needed and to need.
There's a real doubling too here of knowing, around knowing. At first, she's not sure who the young people are or why she's there with them. Later, she gets the clay tablet with writing on it that she doesn't understand. So there are two places of receiving something or being with something that you don't quite know what it's about. But what she does at the end, I think, is remarkable. She says, I want to leave, but the young people are begging me to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And she does. She stays. And I think that is really promising. And I like what you said, too, that later she can perhaps decode the writing on the clay tablet as well. But she hears the call of these unknown, as yet unknown, young people. And what's young in us can grow.
I also look at her age at 47, and she could wander out into the forest alone, or she could be concerned with a generation that's coming up behind her. And that's kind of a developmental decision that all of us make as we move through midlife. Do we have a sense of legacy and passing on to a younger generation, or do we not?
Yeah, the same way that there's the previous generation in the dream in the form of the old man. Joseph, I love what you said about symbol making function, and this quote from Jung that's found in volume 5 just sort of jumped out at me. He said, symbols were never devised consciously, but were always produced out of the unconscious by way of revelation or intuition. And I absolutely agree with you. I think that's what we're witnessing in this dream. And I wonder if that's a good place for us to stop.
You've been listening to This Jungian Life. From our website, thisjungianlife.com, you can follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, help us produce future episodes by funding us through Patreon, and submit your dreams for possible interpretation on another episode. We'd like to thank our listener who shared a dream for today's show and hope you'll let us know what topics you'd enjoy hearing more about. Until next time, keep living this Jungian life.